So, no matter what, every single summer movie season, there's at least one huge surprise. And this season, well, no, I'm not talking about Garfield the movie. I'm talking about Young Woman in the Sea, because this might be not just the surprise of the summer, but the surprise of 2024. What's going on, you guys? James here with another real review, and today we're talking all about Daisy Ridley's new film, Young Woman in the Sea. A huge thank you to Walt Disney Studios for giving me the chance to see this early in theaters for review. I was one of 4 critics at this screening, and for every other critic that missed out in my market, yeah, you need to see this in theaters, okay? The film releases in select theaters May 31st, and what's really neat is that this was supposed to be a Disney Plus exclusive until Jerry Bruckheimer said, nah bro, we're taking this to theaters. The film is directed by, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce his name, Joachim Rønning, who also directed Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, and co-directed Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales. I didn't love that Maleficent movie, and I did not love that Pirates of the Caribbean film either, but the cast here is what sold me. It stars Daisy Ridley in her first lead role in quite some time since the Star Wars sequel trilogy. She plays Trudy Ederle, and it also stars Tilda Cobham-Hervey as her sister Meg, Kim Bodnia as their father Henry, and Stephen Graham as Bill Burgess, one of the swimmers who, I guess, trekked across the English Channel himself. Now, the film is a sports biopic, right? But it's actually not a slog to get through, which is such a good departure from most biopics lately, especially one I covered, which is Back to Black. Not great. But this film, if you don't know much about it, without spoiling too much, even though it's history, here it is. Young Woman in the Sea highlights the life of Trudy Ederle, an accomplished swimmer who was born to immigrant parents in New York City in 1905. She rose through the ranks of the Olympic swimming team before deciding to accomplish her biggest task yet, being the first woman to attempt and complete a 21-mile swim in the English Channel from France to England. Now, the movie itself doesn't spend too much time in her childhood. Instead, it sort of just thrusts us right into her teenage years, where she begins to learn to swim and compete, and then eventually achieve greatness? Maybe? Question mark? Again, don't want to spoil too much, but just like this movie gets us right into the thick of things pretty quickly, I wanted to get right into my positives, because this film, again, shocked me, and I am so happy to say that it's a summer hit. And it begins with the lead actor here, and that is Daisy Ridley. She proves yet again that she deserves more lead roles because of the simple fact that she is so darn good, and her awesome potential has yet to be fully tapped into yet. She's not even at the ceiling. She's really beginning to get into the prime of her career, and with films like this, I mean, it's a good vehicle for her to display the fact that she can control and command a movie. And I love that she definitely captured the playful charm of Trudy Ederle, who apparently is not afraid of anyone, especially not afraid to stand up to men back in the early 1900s who would rather see women, I don't know, stay in the kitchen, which is awful, and not compete in sports. But I'm so glad Trudy was able to break that barrier, and Daisy Ridley really represents the character well. And while there's nothing absolutely groundbreaking from any of the performances, simply because of the nature of the movie and its PG rating, Daisy Ridley breaks that mold. There were moments where she was commanding the screen with subtle movements, very nuanced bits of acting, and then she would just sort of make facial expressions that either made you laugh or really helped you feel her struggle. So I loved her impact on the movie, and a lot of it works so well because of her. And even her scenes with her sister Meg, who's played by Tilda Cobham-Hervey, also works so well because of Daisy Ridley. I mean, their dynamic ends up paying off by the end of the movie, but it just feels like anyone that Daisy Ridley comes into contact with in this film immediately gets elevated. And I think that's a really special trait that Daisy Ridley has, and I'm so glad this movie allowed her to explore that trait. And there's another aspect to this movie that I really enjoyed, which is the vintage appeal to Young Woman in the Sea. Yeah, I'm not talking about technically, I'm talking about just the vibes. Like I mentioned, it's a PG movie, so it's not going to really do much more than scratch the surface on certain topics like women's rights when it comes to competing in the Olympics, or women's rights in society in general. Things of that nature are not going to be explored as much, but there is a vintage appeal to this film that felt good, while you can also feel upset for women at this time. So no, there's not film grain swimming across the screen, but there are several moments where I felt like a kid again at the cinema watching an inspiring tale that made me warm inside. That's the vintage appeal I'm talking about. It definitely is not just some contrived formulaic film, and it's not a biopic that's going to make you sit through it for 2.5 hours and by the end you just get a Wikipedia copy-paste article. So for me, I felt that Young Woman in the Sea was able to differentiate itself because of this element that it had that made it seem like, oh, okay, you know what, I can watch this in theaters, come away so happy, and then when it gets on Disney Plus, watch it again with my younger sister, brother, family, friend, loved one, and still feel that charm. Now, is it the most breathtaking biopic known to man? Absolutely not. But it is a more effective biopic because it understands what it is and doesn't try to elongate unnecessary moments that so often we have to drudge through in most biopics. And that's also due in large part to director Joachim. And yes, his track record is not excellent, and I don't necessarily love a lot of his films that he's worked on, but his strongest work here is with Young Woman in the Sea, and I love that this is his best film yet, and it gives me hope for Tron Ares because he's also in the director's chair for the new Tron movie. But yeah, he understood, I should say, here in Young Woman in the Sea, how to pace the film properly because it is like a 2-hour movie, and it feel like the payoff was worth all of your patience. Now, the supporting cast also needs to be bragged on because they were surprisingly strong. And in most movies like this, it's easy to have a cheesy supporting cast, especially in a PG film where maybe you have 1 or 2 standouts and the rest are just sort of filler. But in Young Woman in the Sea, I had a handful of standouts that actually make this movie really funny, heartfelt, and at some points you get frustrated, but that's the goal of this character, is to make you feel annoyed. And of course, some of the supporting cast, they have scenes where the dialogue is full of childish jokes or humor that's low-hanging fruit, but for the most part, I was happy with how the supporting cast helped carry this movie. So let's talk about Henry Ederle, Meg and Trudy's father, played by Bodnia, and Gertrude Anna Ederle, who's played by Jeanette Hayne, who's Trudy and Meg's mother. Their back and forth was really cool for me, and it was hilarious at times, but individually these characters are such integral parts in Trudy's life. Trudy is consistently trying to tell her father and also win over her father and let him know, listen, I can do this. I might be a woman, but I can swim with the guys. And then Trudy's mother, Gertrude, that's her name, did a really good job at being a hard-nosed character that, of course, by the third act, you start to see those cracks break and the emotion comes out. So it's really neat to see the evolution of both of these characters. And I gotta say, maybe this is just a note on the side. There's a scene with Gertrude, they're huddling by the radio. I won't say much more, but there's also an actor who looks like Charlie Cox that's there. Maybe I'm wrong, but correct me in the comments. I couldn't find any of this, any evidence to support this on IMDb, but it looked like Charlie Cox. And then there's the character of Bill Burgess, who's played by Stephen Graham. Now, this is an already accomplished swimmer who was on the down and outs in his career, but eventually gets the chance to work with Trudy. And trust me, it's so fun to see these characters together because both Trudy and Bill Burgess have a lot to prove, but also Trudy trusts Bill and is maybe one of the few male characters that actually, I don't know, you want to root for in this movie. It's like Trudy's dad and Bill Burgess, and that's about it. I also really love the performance of Glenn Fleshler, who plays James Sullivan. This is a guy who's in charge of sending athletes to the Olympics from the US in New York City. And I've seen him before, I believe it was in Boardwalk Empire, but man, is he that antagonist type in this movie. He's the roadblock along Trudy's journey, and oh man, it works. his ability to just annoy Trudy and the audience is unparalleled in this film. I loved it. I thought he did a really good job. And lastly, rounding us out with the supporting cast here is Cyan, oh, I hope I don't mispronounce this, Cyan Clifford as the character of Charlotte. This is Trudy's swimming coach. She does a great job in this film. I almost wanted more of her in this movie, and apparently she was in Fleabag, if I'm not mistaken. Fleabag is a show I haven't watched, but Cyan Clifford, wow. Man, like, she nails that old New York accent, but also is hilariously strong in this film. So she did an awesome job as Trudy's swimming coach. So we're almost done with the positives, but I do want to talk about one technical standout here that blew me away and is the biggest surprise outside of Daisy Ridley, of course, being so great in this film. Shouldn't be a surprise, but it will be to most. But in Young Woman in the Sea, the music here is great. Amelia Warren's score is beautiful, immersive, and it really is the cherry on top for the film. The movie definitely needs her score, and I'm genuinely shocked that she hasn't gotten more work. Previous to this movie, she worked on Mr. Malcolm's List in 2022. So it's been 2 years since her amazing composition has scratched or touched the surface of any film or TV show, and she deserves more work. Amelia Warren's score is crazy good, and I want it in my Apple Music library like yesterday. So, man, there are so many instances where I'm so into a scene, and it's a simple swimming scene, because of the score. I'm getting goosebumpies at times, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? This is working for me. So it'll probably work for you too. And one scene in particular that the score helps, but also Daisy Ridley's acting shines almost as bright as anything she did in the rest of the film, is when Trudy attempts to swim across the English Channel. It's a very well done sequence, especially when they get to the shallows, because at that point I was literally very anxious and I felt my asthma coming on. And when that happens in a film, that's how you know a scene is effective. Yeah, I mean, that should not be the barometer for it, but for the most part, I was so locked in, and I could not take my eyes off the screen. Alrighty, so now it's time to get into the negatives, you guys, because Young Woman in the Sea is a good film, and it is a surprising summer hit, yes, but because of the nature of the film's rating, it's quite predictable. Again, this is where you need to adjust your lens for the movie. I felt like this wasn't, something that's going to sink the movie, but I was able to foresee a lot of the story beats before they happened, and sometimes that works, and you're like, hey, I'm just very observant. And then other times you're thinking, man, I guess it's really not so surprising, and it's not as enticing as you expected it. So when the scene happens, and you're correct, it kind of lands with a thud. But I don't also believe the movie did anything particularly new, so there weren't many surprises, twists, and turns, and it is a biopic, so if you, the audience, already know about Trudy Ederle, you're probably not going to be shocked in this movie. But for me, who didn't know about Trudy, I was still able to predict what would happen next. And again, I'm not asking Young Woman in the Sea to reinvent the wheel here, but I was hoping that maybe it would do one or two things a little bit differently and maybe distinguish itself using cinematography, which wasn't bad, but also wasn't too great. At least it did not feel out of place in the VFX department when they were in New York City, because I've seen movies that take place in like the early 1900s where they're in New York City and it looks awful. You can tell there's green screen and a ton of VFX, so it wasn't laid on too thick in this regard. And my last negative point though, because I only had a couple here, there's a recurring element. There's like a motif in this movie, and it's fueled by the song Ain't We Got Fun by Peggy Lee. It's not a bad song. It's actually really catchy. And yes, I've heard it before, but it's sung by Trudy and her sister quite often in this movie, and it just got annoying. It was a really cute plot device at first, but it was severely overused. I was just exhausted by the amount of times it was referred to in the second half of the movie, let alone the first half. I think it would have been more effective if they used it maybe 2 or 3 times. Actually, 3 times is probably enough, but they used it way more than that. So if you don't know about Ain't We Got Fun, it's going to be stuck in your head after the movie, for better or for worse. So overall, you guys, my final thoughts on Young Woman in the Sea. Man, what a pleasant surprise. Wow. It's a feel-good experience, perfect for summertime at the movies. You should honestly take your loved ones, friends, and family to this film. It's a warm blanket type of movie that just sort of wraps you, embraces you, and at times makes you feel a little scared for Trudy, but for the most part, the film just knocks it out of the water. Water pun. And by the end, the movie truly had me cheering for Trudy. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, and again, it's not unfamiliar for most sports and biopic fans, but this movie gives Daisy Ridley the shine she's deserved since the Star Wars sequel trilogy. And Hollywood, I hope you take notice, okay? Because I want her in more leading roles. She deserves it, and movies are better for it, right? So she can lead on her own, and she definitely has a good supporting cast here. And I'm going to be honest, Young Woman in the Sea, I don't think, works as well as it does without Daisy Ridley. So if I even had to rate this movie, you guys, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm giving this one a 4 out of 5. I really like it, and so far, while it's not been the greatest year for movies, this is a diamond in the rough. Man, I feel like I'm back to back with bangers so far. Furiosa and now Young Woman in the Sea. Yes, please go see Furiosa, and now go see Young Woman in the Sea. While the summer box office is kind of in shambles, at least for the most part, I've seen some good movies come through, and man, Young Woman in the Sea is one of them. So there you have it, you guys. That's my real review of Young Woman in the Sea. So let me know in the comments below what you think of the film itself. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more reviews just like this, and let me know, is this going to be one of your favorite summer movies? Kind of keep track of what's going on, because I want you guys to let me know if this had such a positive impact on you as it did for me. Alrighty, y'all. Well, I'm gonna go and swim. I haven't swam in a long time. It's been years, so I wonder if I still got it. What is it? And if I sing Ain't We Got Fun, do I win a gold medal? No? Probably not. Alrighty, y'all. Well, again, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you at the next screening.